I'm Dan Patarini, an outreach officer with the USA Study Abroad branch in the Bureau of Educational and Cultural Affairs at the Department of State. On behalf of the State Department and our colleagues at the Department of Defense, I'm thrilled to welcome you to the third installment of the CLS Boren National Security Strategy webinar series with tonight's focus on Europe. This series aims to connect you with career pathways and areas critical to our nation's national security, as outlined in President Biden's national security strategy. We believe the best way to achieve this is by showcasing exceptional CLS and Boren alumni who have built successful careers in those fields. Tonight, we'll hear from program alumni currently working on European affairs in diverse capacities. Their firsthand experiences and insights will illuminate this dynamic and increasingly complex region. The significance of Europe cannot be overstated. From tackling ongoing security challenges like Russia's war in Ukraine to fostering economic partnerships and strengthening democratic values, Europe is at the forefront of global issues. It is crucial that we deepen our understanding of its languages, cultures, and strategic landscape. And I can't continue without saying at this juncture the importance for Americans to understand Russia, especially, and its people has never been greater. No offense to any of the other languages that we'll talk about tonight, but when we look at the events over the weekend, we look and we understand that mastering Russian language is not just an academic pursuit, but it is a strategic asset that can contribute to helping us to decipher the truth, engage with the Russian people, hold Russia accountable, and build bridges through democracy. We know that everyone in every other part of the world that may oppose the United States doesn't necessarily hate the United States or its people, but talking to and being able to connect with ordinary people is important. And that's one of the things that you'll probably find tonight in common with our panelists, and many of us who've studied foreign languages and been lucky to travel and live and work overseas. Those conversations in the mother tongue of someone who really creates a bond, creates a connection. You'll hear more about that tonight. Boren and CLS play critical roles in supporting the study of European languages and culture. Through immersive experiences, both empower students to become future leaders in government, business, academia, and beyond, equipped with the tools to navigate the vital regions of the world. As we prepare to hear from our insightful panel, I want to share a quote from Secretary of State Antony Blinken, highlighting the importance of Europe. He says, quote, "Europe is a cornerstone of global stability and prosperity. It is home to some of our closest allies, and we share a deep commitment to democracy, human rights, and the rule of law. Together, we face a range of challenges, from Russia's aggression to climate change. Our partnership with Europe is essential to addressing these challenges and building a more peaceful and prosperous future for all," end quote. We hope that this series has sparked your interest if you've joined us for the first two webinars, and will continue to do so. And it'll pique your interest in exploring tonight careers in the European area and focused on Europe. And we hope you will join us for the final webinar in this series, which will take place in a few, I guess, a month from now, maybe. And that focus will be on Sub-Saharan Africa. Before turning over to my colleagues from the DoD, I want to share just some statistics, some encouraging statistics from the latest round of CLS applications. We had 5,100 applications for the CLS program for summer 2024. 51% of the applicants identified as students of color, demonstrating a huge commitment to inclusivity. 8% identified as having a disability, 22% as first-generation college students, and 30% as Pell eligible, ensuring that this program is a program that delivers on accessibility and incorporates all viewpoints. Applicants represented over 600 higher ed institutions. So on the CLS side, we're really proud of that. And I know our colleagues that work on Boren are proud of the work that they do, as are we. Thank you for joining us today. I want to sincerely thank our colleagues at the American Councils and the CLS team there, Caitlin and Caitlin, and many others. And of course, our colleagues at DoD and Boren and their implementing partners at IIE. With that, I want to say thank you again for joining. We hope that you have a wonderful evening with us. And I'm going to leave it there and turn it over to my good colleague, Allison Patz.
Thank you, Dan. Really inspiring words. And actually, I'll just go off script straight away and just say how inspiring it is to hear those CLS numbers and to recognize what an audience of people that are hungering for these scholarship opportunities. I'm so pleased to say that the Boren Awards also experienced some really great increases this year to both our scholarship and our fellowship numbers. The application just closed a few weeks ago, so indeed, I hope that many of the folks that considered applying for Boren and or folks on university campuses who helped those excellent applicants apply, welcome. You are very welcome to our community here tonight. I will also point out that I'm sure we have hiring officials on the line. What is truly unique and beautiful about this CLS program, about the Boren program, is that these are federal pipeline programs for talent that are interested in meaningful public service careers, have that opportunity to gain a broadening experience while they're abroad, to engage deeply with the culture, people, the language, to gain so many skills from critical thinking, tolerance for ambiguity, ability to trust yourself and to be fearless, courageous, and to not be afraid to make mistakes. This is what it means to be a CLS award recipient. This is what it means to be a Boren. And it's those voices that are so impactful to our national security space. Our alumni are truly making a fantastic difference from all sector of our public space, from DoD, State Department to the Department of Homeland Security, USAID, the Peace Corps. And I would love for my colleague Chase, if he wouldn't mind, to put in the chat tonight. I'm very pleased to say that on an annual basis, the Boren program reports out to Congress where all of our alumni are serving. We just sent that report up. So it is with the White House. It is with many of our Senate and House committees to also spread this good news of what it means to be a Boren Award recipient, many of whom came from the CLS program. So there's just a lovely commingling of all of these government efforts to really create a louder voice that is globally informed and certainly making a huge impact on our national security. I will leave it there because I know what you're most interested in tonight is to hear from our wonderful moderator and our panelists. However, before I introduce Ms. Keely Botkin, I will point out just quickly, Ms. Kaveri Advani, who is the program manager for the CLS program. She is the brainchild behind this entire series. So thank you, Kaveri, for all of the work that you have done. And with that, I am super pleased to introduce Ms. Keely Botkin. She is not only a 3-time CLS award recipient, she's also a Boren and a Fulbright. So, we've got the real trifecta here. So Keely, on to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Dan and Allison, especially for those kind words. I do just want to thank everyone at American Councils and the Department of State and the Department of Defense for putting together this panel and inviting me to moderate. I would just say that I personally feel that my experiences on the CLS program, the couple of times that I did it, and the Boren Fellowship played a huge role in defining my academic and professional interests, but also in leading me on my career path and to where I am today. So it's great to be here today, to be facilitating this conversation about these programs and the impact that they can have on your career trajectory. So to begin our discussion on the region, Europe and Eurasia, as understood or at least organizationally defined by the US government, is an expansive and diverse region that spans 50 countries, many of which are some of the United States' closest and longest standing allies and partners. And in this respect, it's really impossible to overlook the importance of NATO, of the Transatlantic Alliance, to US foreign policy in the region. And it's clear that strengthening that alliance, in some cases expanding that alliance, and really building and growing those relationships is a key U.S. foreign policy goal. Similarly, the United States cooperates really closely with the European Union and its member states, as well as with other intergovernmental regional organizations on a number of strategic priorities that are not just limited to the European region. In the case of NATO, this obviously includes security cooperation, but in other spheres, it includes expanding trade and economic ties, to supporting democracy and human rights. And again, not just limited to Europe, but oftentimes in cooperation with European partners to promote those rights around the world. But as Dan kind of alluded to in some of his remarks, there are also really significant challenges in the region. And I know everyone here knows that US foreign policy, both within Europe, but also globally, is having to contend with the serious threat that is posed by Russia and its war of aggression in Ukraine, which should also come as no surprise as a particular focus of the national security strategy. During this same time period, we've seen the US working to get Turkey and now Hungary, both NATO allies, to approve Sweden's bid to join the alliance, which has been taking some time. And in the last couple of years, we've also seen the resumption of conflict in the South Caucasus between Azerbaijan and Armenia, which is all just to say that all of these issues raise really important and urgent questions for US policy in the region, and goes to demonstrate how Europe and Eurasia will continue to require both the United States' attention, but also its engagement. And in order to do that, the US government will really need and can really benefit from individuals who know the region, who know the language, who know the culture, and who have expertise that's not only grounded in their particular field, but also an experience of having lived in and worked in and really gotten to know those countries. I would just add, for me personally, I found that language skills have really given me an edge in getting interviews and at the end of the day, getting a job offer. But it's also had a meaningful impact on my ability to do my work, whether that's, being able to be more quickly informed by reading local media outlets on the latest developments, or being able to connect more directly and engage with a foreign government official on foreign policy issues or human rights concerns. So that's enough from me for now, because I know our panelists will also have many thoughts to share on working in the region and the benefits of having participated in the CLS program or BOREN or both. So with that, let me introduce our panelists. I will introduce all three very quickly, and then just turn it over to them to each share a little bit more about, their backgrounds and their program or language experience. And then after that, we will get into the discussion, which I know is what everyone is looking forward to. So I will just read everyone's names and titles really quickly, and then we can go one by one. So today's panelists are Chelsea Cervantes de Blois, a climate security analyst for the Office of the Geographer and Global Issues at the Department of State; Nikedria Ray, who works as a foreign affairs specialist and country director for Finland, Iceland, Norway, and Sweden in the Department of the Air Force; and Lucy Minikosi Whelan, who is a graduate student at Harvard University, earning her master's in regional studies, Russia, Eastern Europe, and Central Asia. So Chelsea, I will first hand it over to you for your introduction. And I think we may have just lost Chelsea. Oh, well, in that case, Nikedria, perhaps we can start with you first.
Of course, yes. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for dialing in, and thank you for that wonderful introduction, Keely. So, as you said, my name is Nikedria Ray. I'm a country director, foreign affairs specialist by trade. I previously worked in foreign disclosure and technology security. I also did strategic planning for security cooperation. I'm a graduate of UT Austin. I did their master's program in Russian, East European, and Eurasian studies. So shout out to anyone who's also studying that region and that language. I did the 2019 summer CLS program in Bishkek, Kyrgyzstan, where it was a really important kind of transition for me to be able to study full-time in St. Petersburg, Russia, doing another master's program there over.
Okay, and then we can go on to Lucy.
Well, thank you so much for that introduction, Keely. It's a wonderful honor to be here today to speak with everyone and to be on such a distinguished panel. As Keely mentioned, I'm a regional specialist focused on Eastern Europe and the Caucasus. So I'm currently earning my master's degree in Russian, Eastern European, and Central Asian Studies at Harvard. And I work as a research assistant at the Harvard Kennedy School's Intelligence Project. And I'm an invited lecturer at Gori State University in Georgia, which is located about an hour outside of Tbilisi. I primarily study Ukraine and Georgia with a focus on Russian warfare against both countries. I have also spent years working with NGOs, universities, and media outlets across Ukraine and Georgia. I completed a Fulbright scholarship in Odessa, Ukraine, and a critical language scholarship in Tbilisi, and then a Boren fellowship in Tbilisi this past year, among other experiences. I also received 2 foreign language and area studies fellowships that funded most of my master's degree, and I'm happy to give advice about this particular fellowship as well. And that was during the 2020-2021 academic year, and then the other was for to study Ukrainian in the summer of 2021. So I wanted to just mention that completing these scholarships and fellowships has really set the stage for my entire career. I wouldn't have the regional expertise that I do now if I hadn't gotten to spend a significant amount of time living in country. The language skills and cultural competencies and the overseas experience that I gained through Fulbright, CLS, and the Boren Fellowship Program certainly helped me get into my graduate program at Harvard and then received many more work opportunities since then. Thanks.
Thank you for that, Lucy. And then Chelsea, I know we lost you briefly, but if we can come back to you for your introduction.
Yeah, apologies. I'm in transit as always. This is the story of my life. So I feel very honored to be here. Very excited to be here because really my huge contribution during my PhD research was having language training, language expertise at the local level. And that was a big thing that surprisingly in the field of geography. So I have a PhD from the University of Minnesota in Geography, Environment and Society Department. My specialty is Eurasia. I lived about a decade on and off in Azerbaijan. I speak Azerbaijani, Russian, and Turkish. So I have been a Boren fellow during my PhD. I was studying Turkish, but while there, I was also speaking Russian and Azerbaijani. I was a CLS alum on the Azerbaijani language, and then I was a Fulbrighter in Azerbaijan. And then I was on Title IX, which is where I currently work at the Department of State Funding to study in St. Petersburg, Russia. And then, as previously mentioned, there's also other fellowship and opportunities I'm happy to talk about while you're in studies, which is the FLOSS, Foreign Language and Area Studies. And that I use that every single year in my PhD and my master's that funded all my education. That contributed to my niche and my expertise in the region. So it's really exciting to be here currently. I also, in the past decade, have worked on climate change impacts, and now I'm a climate change impacts expert at the U.S. Department of State, working in the Office of the Geographer and Global Issues. So I always joke I have the best job, the dream job, because as a geographer, I'm working in the Office of Geography. So I'm very excited to be here, and I'm excited for all your questions.
That's great. Thank you. And I will just take the opportunity to also personally plug for the FLAS scholarships, because I also greatly benefited from that and found it very useful for funding most of my graduate program. So with that, thank you for the introductions. I do have a couple of questions to start us off, but in the meantime, do want to encourage our audience to also begin submitting your questions so that we can get to that later on in the discussion as well. So to start, my first question, in the national security strategy, the Biden administration has outlined the importance of the transatlantic relationship in terms of strengthening relationships with allies and partners, tackling shared challenges that cross borders, such as climate change, food insecurity, and communicable diseases, and responsibly managing growing strategic competition. Can you discuss how your work in your various fields align with these objectives? And I think for this first round, I will just go in the order that we just did. So, Nikedria, if you wouldn't mind starting.
Of course. So, with every national security strategy that's published by the White House, there's also a complementary national defense strategy. And that specific one guides the way that we operate within the Department of Defense very much. And it echoes a lot of the language that you see in the NSS, with particular emphasis on the role that allies and partners play in integrated deterrence, and developing a cohesive and combat credible force that we can all, respond to a conflict together, or in lieu of the United States participation, other countries are able to defend themselves. So foreign affairs for DoD, it's kind of our job to facilitate those relationships, to make sure that we're delivering capabilities to different countries. We want our platforms to be able to speak to each other, whether that's everyone operating F-35s or similar vehicles, making sure that our sensors, radars, and everything can communicate with one another. We're speaking the same languages, security cooperation. We even have English language training and things like that. We send people abroad. Most people don't know that we have like Office of Defense Cooperations within different embassies around the world. So there is definitely within the Department of Defense like a diplomatic lens that we look at the world, and we engage allies and partners so that we do get after those objectives. And that's all I have. Back to you.
Thanks. Lucy, can we go to you next?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much. So I would say that my work as a graduate student and as a researcher mostly aligns with the priorities of strengthening relationships with allies and partners and tackling shared challenges that cross borders. So Ukraine and Georgia, the two countries where I've spent the most time and what most of my work focuses on, are US strategic partners. So through the articles and analysis that I publish, I'm able to use my regional expertise to share important on-the-ground perspectives with people in the US, with the ultimate goal of informing policymakers and people who are influential and make decisions in government. And presenting facts in my articles or when I speak at events is another way of combating Russian disinformation that runs rampant, including US information spaces. In fact, I would say it is our duty as experts to inform the public on these issues. And through the interviews I conduct, both for my graduate research and my 2 oral history projects, I'm able to elevate the voices of those who are affected by Russian warfare and Russia's occupation, so that people in the US will see them and understand the cost that soldiers and civilians alike are paying in Ukraine and Georgia. And living abroad as an American who is supported by federal programs like all of us have been, I felt it put me in a position of being a citizen diplomat. And that's a particular term that the Fulbright program loves to say. And that's always what I try to be when I'm overseas. I've always worked on developing lasting relationships with my friends and colleagues, people I work with, people I know, and acting as a bridge between US and Ukrainian or Georgian organizations and universities. I'm by no means alone while working on this. It's always a collaborative effort, but I always try to do what is available to me as a civilian to foster cooperation between the US, Ukraine, and Georgia. Thanks.
Thank you for that, Lucy. I especially appreciated your comment on being a citizen diplomat, because I do think that that's a sentiment that was widely shared amongst participants of the CLS program, but also the Boren Fellowship and Scholarship. And if we could go to Chelsea next.
Yeah, so in my current role, my title is the Lead Climate Security Analyst in my position here at the Office of Geography and Global Issues. And my main client, so what I do is I call myself an interpreter. I interpret information about climate impacts and how that impacts certain interests, right? So my main client is Secretary John Kerry and his team SPEC, so Special Presidential Envoy on Climate. And as we know, publicly he has stepped down, but I continue to service the team because they're very much still in motion, meeting our goals. And then this last year, I was at COP28 in Dubai. So my job is to understand and interpret what's going on with climate impacts the world. So my background and training is in ag econ, soil science, and then as a geographer, I'm a human geospatial geographer. So I have classic cartography skills, remote sensing skills, but also understanding the dynamics within that with space and place. So when we understand climate impacts, that could be climate migration movements, decision making, that is understanding supply chains, that's understanding climate finance decision making and negotiations. And so within that role, it really requires me to put on many hats as a geographer. Am I thinking now in the data world? Do I need to now think about in the policy of what that means? How do my clients, when they ask me, oh, what's the data on that? I have to interpret what they really mean is I want a pretty graphic that helps me support what I'm asking at the table, right? And so this is what I do on my day to day, and it's quite exciting because it's never the same agenda on a daily basis, but it is the same efforts as understanding how the U.S. engages and interacts with climate impacts on a global scale.
While also putting together all of your extensive experience in Azerbaijan, I hope this means that you'll be attending next year's climate change conference in Baku. So for the next question, what do you find most challenging about your work? And on the flip side of that, what do you find most rewarding about it? And I think we may have lost Chelsea again. So to switch it up, I think I will go to Lucy next.
Sure, thank you. So I would say the most challenging thing about my work at the moment is balancing multiple jobs, projects, and graduate school all at once. My master's program is technically 2 years long, and I finished all of my coursework in 2022. But I decided to do the CLS program, a Boren Fellowship, and an ACES internship grant while remaining enrolled as a student. Oh, and last summer, I also decided to write an entirely new master's thesis because my first one, which was focused on Russian tactics in Ukraine in 2014, was virtually impossible to complete due to Russia's invasion. And I'm currently finishing up my new master's thesis, and I will graduate in May of this year. But at the same time, I was also invited to teach an online course at Gori State University in the fall and winter, and that came with a much heavier workload than I was expecting. And balancing that with my master's thesis would have been hard enough, but I also accepted a job at the Harvard Kennedy School's Intelligence Project in order to help support myself. So all of this has led to an extremely heavy workload, and while I wouldn't necessarily recommend taking on so many opportunities at the same time, all of my experiences have been extremely rewarding, and I wouldn't have it any other way. I think the most rewarding thing for me is building lasting relationships with my friends and colleagues overseas and contributing to their organizations, universities, and communities in meaningful ways. A perfect example of this would be one of the oral history projects I started at Harvard, which focuses on Gori, where I teach. Gori is a small city of about 40,000 people that is 20 kilometers away from the administrative boundary line with the Russian-occupied region of South Ossetia. And the goal of my project is to collect the stories of Gori residents about how the war and occupation affects their daily lives, and then they'll be published on the Harvard Georgian Studies Program website. There has been such an outpouring of support for this project in Gori, with my Georgian friends and colleagues doing everything they can to help. And it is so rewarding to know and to hear that the project that I'm doing, the work that I'm doing, is actually important and makes a difference in the lives of people who so rarely get a chance to share their stories on a larger platform. So all in all, although my workload is always pretty heavy, the work I do is extremely fulfilling, and I wouldn't change it.
Thanks for that, Lucy. And I remember those grad school days and do not envy how busy it is that you sound. Nikedria, would you like to answer the question next?
Of course. Yeah, so I'll say that what is rewarding and challenging about my job would be one and the same. I have a handful of countries. Every foreign affairs specialist has quite a few. And it's not enough just to understand internally what our national security strategy says, what our public opinion is, and kind of what's happening at political levels. I have to have that level of awareness for all of the countries in my portfolio, because all of those things are going to shape the way that we're able to interact with our partners in our ability to meet their specific defense requirements. And so when we have elections coming up and our partners might have elections, it becomes a little bit hectic sometimes, just making sure that we're finding a way to balance just the variety of stakeholders and different types of opinions that might come out in public, especially as it relates to different, crises and international events that are going to affect how other partners perceive transactions that happen between the United States government and any particular partner. And a lot of it is just really, being keenly aware of different things, staying on top of current events, and it makes the job really interesting because no one day is going to be like another one. There's always something new to do. There's always something new to learn, and there's lots of opportunities to travel and meet a lot of wonderful people who are, we're all after, the same collective defense goals, and that's all I have.
All great points. Thank you, Nikedria. Chelsea?
Yeah. So challenges, I would say when you are an interpreter in my world, meaning you have to translate what you're given and then communicate that where it's nice and pretty for your policymakers, it is a challenge sometimes to understand what they're actually wanting when they're asking the questions. So in my job, it's really my responsibility or my duty to find out what they're really asking in order to properly address their questions, because then I'm doing better support towards them. That's one of my main challenges. Also too, and this is in any sector, in any field, is data limitations, right? This is like the new wave, the new buzzword that we're dealing with these days is data, data, data. But what does that mean? One of the things that I keep going on, and anything that I've spoken at, is we need data standardization. And how is that defined? How do we look at that as a group? But then at the same time, do we have a convention of where we agree to what is data and how it's defined and how it's categorized and organized? Because in order to support any leverage negotiation or argument, you need data points, you need information to support that. But then how do you know your data is accurate? How do you know it's supporting actually what you're trying to fight for? So this is the challenges that I have to deal with, because there's only so many things I can do. Also, in my office, I am a part of the science team. And on the climate portfolio, it's just me, so small and mighty. And I work on a global portfolio. So it can be a little bit demanding, given that I have to be in 5 places at once sometimes. Hence why I'm here in transit talking. So, but I really like it. But I do like the motion and the combustion of all that jazz, because it really makes this work really enjoyable and fun, and to see so many people want to actually engage. And the future is looking at these things. This is why it's exciting, is understanding how the global community can work together to address serious things that happen to everyone, just at different scales and levels.
Thank you for that, Chelsea. And yes, definitely grateful that you're able to join us despite being in transit. So I have one more question from my set before we start going into some of the audience questions. So how have you incorporated language and cultural competencies gained during your CLS or BORN experience abroad into your current work? And maybe to switch it up again, we can start with Chelsea this time.
Yes, let's do it so I don't lose connection. Yeah, no, language training. So I will say this, and this is for courage and swimming against current. I can tell you, embarking, I'm probably on the earlier end or the beginning end of using language training application, especially in my field of work. I was laughed at by academics, by some researchers, if I was doing tourism, or what was the need of knowing language training if you can just hire translators. And to me, I thought that was an irresponsibility. I thought it's my duty as a researcher to understand and engage in the environments I'm working in, especially in data poor environments. And I have publications on this for my dissertation research, creating data sets and also acknowledging what this means when we're looking at both qualitative and quantitative data. So I just want to say that and I never even thought of that. My logic really was, and to speak languages to better understand what I'm trying to obtain when it came to data. That was my motivation. So right now in my job, I tend to listen to podcasts, read news in the languages that I know. One, because I don't want to lose that muscle, that skill set. But two, it actually gives you different interpretations and viewpoints in the things that are happening in the world, what you're talking about. And I do encourage you, if you, let's say some folks will say, well, which podcast or which news agency is the best for so-and-so language? And I would suggest actually pick a good 3 and pick ones that are different, because it's really helpful to see the different interpretations on the same topic from different viewpoints of that country, right? Because the United States is quite large and big, and we have a diversity of thought and beliefs. And so it is wise to understand what the whole country is consisting of, not just a portion of it, if you want to understand a general overview of an average. So this is what I do as a responsibility as a scientist in my duties, is reading a variety of different sources in the languages that I know, but also to then going into languages that aren't regional specific. So I also speak and read Spanish fluently, and I tend to also use that to see what they're saying about these countries, because I want to see then who is partners or who is more sided with certain regions of the world or countries. And then that way, then I can understand how certain friendships are created or partnerships. So I use it all the time, one, just for personal reasons to contain that muscle memory and that strength within that, vocabulary and so forth. But at the same time, it does help me in my work to understand what's happening in the world and what's going on. So you don't lose it. And it actually only gives you a huge advantage to understand what's happening. And people can argue, well, data science, you don't need that, it's just numbers. Yeah, but I found data and information only in Russian in some countries where I couldn't find it in English, and how they categorize it. And I understood how they define, for example, births versus mortality rates in the former Soviets. So little nuances that one would not usually think are important. This is where language skills does come into key play.
No, I think that's a great point, and it also really goes to demonstrating how the number of languages, really give you so many more insights into different perspectives, and is bringing to mind for me a Turkish idiom about that exact thing, about one language is one person, 2 languages, 2 people. But Nikidria, can we go to you next?
Of course. So incorporating language and cultural competencies, just in day-to-day, I just find ways to activate that kind of thinking and what I'm doing anyway. So my music is on shuffle. There's random Russian tracks that might come up. Similar to what Chelsea just said, I have podcasts and they'll just play during my commute, and it'll be randomly different topics in Russian. And it helps me to stay abreast of whatever are the conversations that are happening there. Instagram, if you're scrolling on Instagram, there's a lot of opportunities to follow different media sources and get these bite-sized bits of information, and also just to see what people are saying about it in different countries that might speak the same language. And so I do that, and I have conversations with people that are native speakers. At work, we even have a Russian language group that we engage with for all of the Russian language nerds who don't want to quite let it go. We have specific resources in my office that if you want to study, you can formally, or different platforms that are offered through government services where you can just engage with language whenever you have the time. And so there are a lot of resources available out there, free resources as well. And I just try to tie it in. And one of the big things too, just trying to see how academic spaces are talking about issues, because you want to get too overwhelmed with specific agency, like DoD think is a thing where it can easily become an echo chamber instead of trying to engage with other communities. And so I like to look at think tanks in other countries and see how they are talking about things in academic spaces as well. And that's all I have.
Thanks. Lucy?
Thank you so much. So at the time, I interpreted this question a little differently when we got it. So I talked kind of about how my language skills and cultural competencies that I got through CLS and Boren have impacted my career trajectory at the moment. And I also can give advice about how I maintain my language skills now. But I wanted to say, again, I keep going back to Fulbright, but that's just because I did Fulbright 5 years ago, and CLS and Boren were more recent, but I would say Fulbright, and then again through CLS and Boren, these fellowships really set the stage for my entire career. And completing a Fulbright scholarship in Ukraine helped me get into my master's program at Harvard, because the Davis Center places a huge emphasis on language skills and regional experience during the selection process. But more than that, spending 7 months in Ukraine was a formative experience for me. It defined what I've spent the last 5 years working on, and the love that I have for Ukraine and its people really started because of Fulbright. My CLS and Boren fellowships were also incredibly important because I had no prior experience living in Georgia before I did CLS and Boren. And the year I spent in Tbilisi has also defined my career path since then. I would never have gotten a job at Gori State University if I hadn't visited the city 6 or 7 times to conduct research during my Boren fellowship. And during that time, I became really deeply connected with the community, and the place has since become really important to me. And in 2 weeks, I'm actually going back to Georgia for another 5 months to teach in person. And that's an opportunity I never would have gotten without my Boren fellowship. And I would say that having those language skills and that regional experience made me more competitive for my job at the Harvard Kennedy School. And my boss even said that he had chosen me in part because I had taken the time to invest in learning regional languages and spent years living in country. And my overall point with this was just to say that the language skills and cultural competencies that you gain through CLS and Boren are a gift that really keeps on giving if you use them intentionally and in order to make connections and find new opportunities in the right places. And in terms of maintaining language skills, I can also talk about that to a degree, I would say. Because my main focus is on Eastern Europe and the Caucasus, especially Ukraine and Georgia, I follow outlets that specifically report on current events in those regions, some that are local and some that are international. If I were to recommend a handful, for more international news, Radio Free Europe and Radio Liberty are great. They publish in all kinds of languages around the world, including Ukrainian and Georgian and Russian. But in terms of English language coverage, a great local outlet in Ukraine is the Kyiv Independent. Highly recommend their excellent reporting. For Georgia, I would recommend civil.ge, which is a Georgian news outlet that also publishes in English. And they're affiliated with the United Nations Association of Georgia, which receives and manages USAID, receives funding and manages one of USAID's projects in Ukraine. And then for coverage of Russia, I would recommend Meduza, which is an independent Russian news outlet that is now based in Latvia, and its reporting on Russian domestic politics is excellent. I think having that blend of local and international news will give you the best idea of what's happening in this part of the world, or anywhere really, as my fellow panelists have already said. And those are just the main ones that I follow. And I would just echo what everyone said so far about podcasts, videos, you know, anything you can do to simulate that immersion that you would get through a language program or living in country. Just have these on in the background, you know, and especially it's good if you can find something that you truly enjoy listening to beyond just work. If it's true crime podcasts, like that's something that has really helped me. Russian language true crime podcasts, because it helps to relax and also study your language at the same time. And my last piece of advice that I would just say briefly is to study with a tutor if you can. Even if it's for just 1 hour a week, I find that in my experience, speaking skills are the first thing to just go when you stop doing intensive language study or any language study. And if you just have a tutor for maybe an hour a week to practice your speaking, and then they can give you materials to work with in, you know, at other times during the week. And it's not always terribly expensive, even if you're working with a private tutor. If you find someone who's maybe affiliated with a university, or you can pay out of pocket from someone in country, work with them on Zoom. That's what I do. But I would highly recommend finding a way to practice your speaking skills, because that to me is like one of the most crucial parts of knowing a language, and it also goes away the fastest in my experience.
Thank you for all of that really helpful advice, Lucy. And I would also just add on my own suggestion, like particularly if you're in the DC area, that there's also a lot of language get-together groups too that will meet, and it's, you meet in a cafe or somewhere and you can just have an informal discussion. That's a great way to practice and maintain your language skills as well. So we're about to start moving on to some of the audience questions. So this is going to be my last reminder. If you, any of our participants have a question for our panelists, to please submit those in the Q&A function at the bottom of the Zoom. So we have one question from the audience. Are the careers that you discussed in your applications for either the Boren Award or the CLS program consistent with what you are doing now? If not, what prompted you to explore a different role related to European affairs?
I'm going to jump in because I think that's a great question. Because people ask me, how did you do your roadmap? And honestly, I had no idea I would be sitting where I told people I'd never do a PhD, and here I am with the PhD. So, so here is what I would advise, because I've been on selection committees. I've also helped applications on such things. And really what these applications are looking for, if it's either a fellowship, a scholarship for language, or for funding, or if it's coming to graduate school, what they're looking for is to see not concrete things, but what's your 5-year general sketch? What's your motivation of why you want to do this now? Because the motivation is meaning that you have an outline, an idea of why you want to take this step to go in this direction. Naturally, life happens, and there could be, from that one step, different avenues, different paths that come your way, and opportunities that you should take. Because sometimes opportunities, they don't come again because the war happens in a country, or because certain partnerships collapse. I mean, I was one of the last cohorts that got to do a very cool scientific exchange with other scientists in Russia, right before COVID happened, and then no longer that opportunity exists, right? So I would say take any opportunity that comes your way, but how can you take those opportunities? Well, prepare yourself. So in your language. So if you invested in a language, don't ignore that language. Continue building that if you want to learn other languages. There's no wasting when you're learning and expanding your skill set. And I've done a soil scientist and ag economist at UW-Madison. Then in my master's, I was in the language and cultures of Asia department, where I focused on Eurasia, specifically looking at NGOs in Turkey that are focused on women development, and in Azerbaijan. Then boom, I find myself working for a news agency in Turkey, in Ankara, and then all of a sudden I find myself in Colombia as a visiting climate change researcher. None of these seems at first, people tell me, this doesn't make sense. What's your trajectory? But for me, it was gaining skills as a scientist and diversity of places to understand my role as a scientist. And here I am today, servicing the US and its people as a scientist on the science team with all my different experiences. So in those applications, it's really what's your motivation and what's your general idea. My general idea, I would say, was I want to be a Eurasian expert. And this is how I define that. There's no wrong way. You just need to convince that reviewer that you have an idea or a strong motivation why you want to do this. Because the goal is you don't want to give it to somebody who ends up not really investing in that and not really caring to go further. I'm not saying that they won't use it, but you want to see somebody who's applying that same skill set and that same motivation to other things in their career. I hope that's helpful. And I'm sure my colleagues on the panel have many other great things to share on this.
No, I think that's great. I think in so many people's cases, it is a winding path. It's not a direct shot to your dream job. Nikudri and Lucy, do either of you want to jump in and weigh in on this question too?
I can really second that. I'm sorry. Now I'll just go quickly. I would second everything that Chelsea just said, like absolutely 100%. My CLS program, I didn't do Boren. I didn't have time. I needed to get into the job force immediately. But yeah, I did CLS, again, calling out FLAS as a really great resource for people who want to study abroad. CLS was kind of this bridging mechanism that allowed me to continue working on my language studies so that I could focus on a master's program in St. Petersburg, Russia. And the impetus behind me doing that was because I wanted to understand from a Russian perspective how they view energy as part of their national security. And I wrote an analytical paper for the government. I would say maybe a month or so before Russia invaded Ukraine. And I had that awareness just for understanding Russian culture, political culture, the way that they interact with the states around them, decision making, and things like that. Just having that awareness really helped me to have that insight. And so it's really important, essentially, to have a specific target. What is it that you want to be an expert in? And how is this particular program going to help you reach a milestone that gets you closer to that end objective? And that's all I have.
I think those are both excellent answers, and I'll defer my response to allow another question.
Great, because I think we just have time for one more audience question. The time has just flown by. It is somewhat related. So for everyone, when it came to your work, were you sought after for your roles, or did you apply to them directly through either, Department of Defense or Department of State? And I think this gets at a really interesting question about, the role and importance of networking potentially in finding a job. So if anyone has thoughts right off the bat and wants to jump in.
I'll
Chelsea.
jump in. I'll jump in. Oh, go ahead, Lucy. Go ahead, because you passed on the.
Okay, sure. Thank you. So I think I'm in a bit of a unique situation at the moment because my two fellow panelists have already found careers in the government, and I have yet to start my federal service. Currently applying to jobs, so fingers crossed. But the point I wanted to make was just about the importance of networking, because I feel like for all of the opportunities I've gotten, networking has been such a huge part of it. However, I do think at the same time, for something like a fellowship application or fellowship applications, scholarship applications, those were like cold apply kind of things. Because you have to write the application, you have to submit it, but you can get feedback from other people about what kind of points like would you advise I include, and I completely echo the idea of motivation being something that you need to, if you can clearly articulate why you want something, that is going to make you so much more competitive. And I think that, being in dialogue with other people and exploring your interests are a way to kind of determine what that motivation is. But at the same time, I would say for my grad school applications, networking helped me a lot because I ended up meeting a number of people from my department before I actually submitted my graduate school application, and that was very intentional. I think if you're going to be pursuing a graduate application, it is going to make you so much more competitive if you can show that you've taken the time to get to know people in the department and that you have projects that you want to work on with them. You have clear ideas about what you can bring to the program. Like I met the director of the Harvard Ukrainian Research Institute, Serhiy Plokhy, through a series of intentional networking efforts where it started to be like, okay, I need to ask all of these people I know. At the time, it was all my Fulbright cohort, the scholars, the older the people with PhDs who do Fulbright. I was like, I need to ask everyone who knows Serhiy Plokhy, who can introduce me to Serhiy Plokhy. And it ended up being my Fulbright affiliate who was able to do that. And I think it's just a matter of finding that connection that gets you that connection, that gets you that connection. And eventually it kind of gets you to where you need to go, because having that human element in your application of knowing people in your department is so huge. So I'll finish my answer there and let everyone else chime in.
Chelsea, I think you were going to add as well.
Yeah, so yes, excellent points. And I think you're in a great position to offer that advice since you're in transition. I would say shortly after graduating or even in this time that Lucy's in, I strongly encourage people to consider and then take up the opportunities of those alumni networks. So for example, I got a mentor from the Boren Fellowship, and that was exceptional. They told me about these different opportunities to consider, these different events, and also with CLS, I served as a mentee and mentor in the opportunities that were provided. Get engaged with those, because not necessarily creating an option to meet someone or to get a job, but really just to understand the process of what logistically happens and how it's viewed when you are applying to a job and what's that mean. Like, just the logistics is just helpful to understand the science behind what this is. And also, when you're engaged in those alumni opportunities, you then get to be I think you get put in a pool of people, or your name is somewhere, because I actually was recruited during my PhD program by DoD. And then because of my research and my scholarship in academia, I naturally was already networked with my own cohort of people, but also in my current job at State, the director of the Geography of the United States recruited me in this job because he's seen my work. He was serving on panels that reviewed student paper awards. So he saw my work as a PhD student and knew who I was over the years. So in that, you don't even have to engage on these levels if you don't want. But if you are in your school, like student competition paper programs, get engaged in those. Apply to those things, because that's how my research got noticed. And that's how I was recognized as an expert and as a specialist. And that's what brought me actually to DC, because I had no intention of actually coming to DC. But because of me being invested in being an expert in what I wanted to do, because here's the thing. I think networking is a great idea, but it has to be sincere and it has to be genuine, because you're really not going to thrive in anything, I strongly believe, if you don't really love what you do or not passionate about it. And you don't have to be like, I love this every day, but if you enjoy learning about it, if you enjoy engaging in it, then it is something that is worthwhile for you. And people can feel that, because they don't want to invest and put their name out there for somebody who's not really wanting to continue to learn and even have the ups and downs within that learning process of what you're dealing with. So that's something that networking is good, but you got to be honest with yourself too, and what you really like doing, because you need that drive to come from somewhere, because it's not an easy path. Everything takes a hustle in this life. And even if you excel and you're great at it, there's going to be days where it's challenging. And so this is where your passion for what you're doing, or your drive, your motivation, needs to stay grounded within what you're working on.
All great points. Nikidria, did you want to add any final thoughts on this as well?
Yeah, I know we're running close on time if we haven't already gone over, so I won't say too much. I think that they've given excellent responses to that. Networking is valuable, whether that's being recruited or having people that can vouch for you when you're submitting your applications. I had a letter of recommendation from the former ambassador to Russia, and so that alone was like something that was really great for me, just for my time interning at the State Department, at the embassy over there. And so value those relationships, reach out to people, pick their brains, learn what it is that they do, and align yourself with whatever is the organization's mission, and figure out what you want to do. And that's really all I have.
No, thank you for that. We are quickly coming up to the end of our time. And so I want to thank the audience for all their questions, and actually turn it back over to Dan to give us some closing remarks.
I was going to say, I wish we could just all stay on for a while and do another hour of this, because it really is, it's fascinating. And I'll start with saying, I heard three things tonight. This is essential. What we're doing, the pursuit of language, of knowledge of language, is essential. It's foundational to what we're doing. It's essential. Obviously, it's a group of people here that believe that. But I really think it's true, and people should know this and come to understand it. It's also a labor of love. This is not something that's easy. Anybody that's ever tried to learn another language, that you weren't born maybe with parents from different language cultures or whatever, and had trilingualism or bilingualism at home, it's tough. And it's a lifelong sort of labor of love, being a lifelong learner, if you want to say something like that. And also, it's non-linear. There's no straight path and there's no playbook. And I think you heard that. I think that's really good life advice because I think sometimes we all want to think, oh, this is exactly how I go from point A to B to C to D to E. And I think our panelists and Keely as our moderator showed that that's really not the case. So it's okay to be uncertain, to have ups and downs, and to expect those things. So those were my big takeaways amongst others. Keely, Lucy, Nikitria, Chelsea, I want to thank all of you. I want to thank everybody that was participating. There will be a survey, a post program survey. So please make sure you tell us how we can be better and do more of that. And then be on the lookout for later in this spring, our final installment of the National Security Strategy webinar series that we're doing with our colleagues at Boren, CLS and Boren together. With that, I will thank our panelists and our moderator and our audience and my colleagues in all of this work. Thank you all. Have a wonderful evening. Thanks so much.